welcome everybody to this month's artwork. So while our community is a global one, our school is hosted in Chibuktuk in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We are honored to gather, speak, and make artwork here. My name is Mollie Cronin, and I'm the host of Artwork. Each month, we bring two of our esteemed alum together to talk about the fascinating work that they've been doing since their time at NSCAD. And this month is no exception. We're joined by Christy Thompson, BFA 1997, who is the Senior Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Collections at MoMA, and Stefan Hancherow, Curator for RBC with a BFA from 2008. So Christy, Stefan, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having
Great
us.
to be here. Hi. So many lovely people I see on the call. Great.
Yeah, I think we'll see lots of familiar faces that you guys are definitely going to be a big draw. It's so nice to have you both. I want to take a little time back, and I'd love to start with talking about your time at NSCAD. What were you studying? Who were some of your mentors? Generally, what was your time at NSCAD like? And either one can feel free to jump in.
Christy, please.
Okay, I'm gonna be short. I'm gonna be very short, but I also just want to say a very special hello to Randy Laybourne, because I have not seen Randy since I left Halifax. So good to see you. I still have Randy's artwork and his comic work. It's amazing. So I was a bit of a strange import to NSCAD because I had done my BA at the University of Guelph, and Ron Shubrook was my advisor at Guelph and said, you know, Christy, you shouldn't go to OCAD, you should go to NSCAD. And I was like, you're right, I should. And so I kind of was plopped into the end of a BFA. And Randy, among another of alumni, were so kind to like invite me into a group of people. So I studied under Ed Porter in printmaking, and I've been doing that at the University of Guelph. And then I was asked very, matter-of-factly by some students, was like, are you a Gary's kid or a Jerry's kid? And I was like, what are you guys talking about? And other than constantly getting lost, I also worked with Gary Neal Kennedy. So I did some painting and sculpture as well. And I had a studio in the Champlain building. And I was really there for a year, from 96 to 97. So like, I feel very honored that NSCAD would consider me an alumni, but I had a thrilling time. But Stefan, you go next.
You're totally an alumni. I'm still close with people that came for, even a semester. And I know how much of an effect the school can have on people, and just, it has that kind of vibrancy, and I don't know, you just kind of like, yeah, you make work. It's about art. I found my way to NSCAD. I had originally wanted to go to like architecture out of high school, and a lost transcript meant I took a year off, and I did like a continuing education course at ACAD, where I grew up in Calgary, and was like, oh no, I want art. Like, I needed actual art in my life, and applied to NSCAD and ACAD and I think Emily Carr, and NSCAD just got back sooner, and I was like, I'd love to go to the East Coast. My aunt went to school out in the East Coast, and yeah, it just kind of made sense. And yeah, from the get-go, I met so many amazing people. I'm still very close with some of the foundation teachers that I had, and teachers throughout, and like just all the friends and colleagues, and it had an immense impact on my professional life, and yeah, I'm just really happy that NSCAD was part of it. So I know we're going to get deeper into some more questions. So
thanks to you both for that. I want to ask now a little bit about the trajectory that you took to get to where you are now. So when you were studying fine art at NSCAD to now in these significant roles at major institutions, what was the trajectory for you in your career from NSCAD to this point?
I graduated from NSCAD, and I was looking at graduate school, and I remember everyone kept saying like, well, aren't you just going to New York? And I was like, no, I'm a Canadian. Like, I really feel really strongly about making art in Canada. And so I was a very stubborn kind of like push that away. Like, I didn't have the money to go to a US university. And so I decided to go to the University of Western. I got a TA-ship there, and financially, like, it was a full ride. So I was like, I'm a daughter of an accountant and an English teacher. And I just was like, I'm going to go to Western. And I did my master's there in sculpture and drawing. And then ever since I was in school at university, so at Guelph and NSCAD and Western, I always made sure that I got a job at a museum, partly because I wanted to have some cash. And also I like learned a lot. So I did everything from like front desk, garbage, cataloging, like you name it, I did it all. And when I finished my master's, I was the director of the Redhead Art Gallery, Redhead Gallery, which is a co-op of working with artists. And I learned a lot because I wrote the press releases, I helped install, and it was great. And then in Toronto, like, I really focused on artist-run centers. And so I worked at YYZ Artist Outlet, which was like a full artist-run center where we paid fees, and I was one of the co-directors. And just like as I developed and kept making art, I then went to the power plant as a exhibition coordinator. And I was there for 10 years, and I kind of slowly worked myself up to the interim director. I held the assistant director, but when we had one of our directors had left, they made me interim. And I think the thing I learned at the power plant is that, it's a Kunsthal type museum, non-collecting, and I would do budgets, but every time someone asked me like, well, can you do the budgets for these shows? I'd always say, sure, you have to change my title and pay me additional salary. Like, so, I mean, I'm from the school of like, if you don't ask, you'll never get. And so I worked my way up. And then after being at the power plant for 10 years, Matthew Teitelbaum from the AGO at that time in 2013 brought me into his office, and I was his chief of staff. I oversaw his office, and I worked with two boards. I was the corporate secretary, which means that you are dealing with both the foundational board and the governing board. And I worked with our board president, and we looked at governance of the AGO. So I learned a lot about governance, how a strategy for the director's office. Matthew and I would joke. I would say to him, I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly as your chief of staff, and we're going to figure out how we're going to deal with things. And that was a great experience. I learned tons. But Matthew knew I really wanted to go back to the arts. So he made me, when the time was right, the chief of exhibitions, collections, and conservation at the AGO. And then I got to work with, like, I will say, my people, the people who are behind the scenes. And I was at the AGO from 2013 to 2021. And I had a reach out from MoMA that my predecessor was leaving, and did I know of anyone? And I said I would like to apply, and I started, I think it was 5 months of Zoom interviews. That was the glory of the pandemic, is interviewing over Zoom. And I got an offer, and I said, what the heck, might as well try it. So the conversation about NSCAD of like, will you go to New York? The answer should have been yes, but it's going to be in a long time. So
Yeah.
that's what happened. So
was there a moment where you sort of realized that the work in these galleries was shifting from this like money making on the side while you're making art to a career trajectory, to a career plan? Or were those always kind of happening at the same time?
it was kind of happening at the same time. I mean, I will say that, at that time in Toronto, when I was working in galleries, the commercial galleries were not like, and Stefan's going to say that, like, they weren't kind of really in existence. It was really like artist run center culture. And so there was a real practicality of working that way.
Mm-hmm.
But as I kept having these jobs, what happened is like my exhibition history was kind of like dwindling down. And I remember when I was at the AGO, I would still make artwork, but I had less time to like exhibit. And to be really honest, I felt like an incredible failure. I was like, oh man, I did all this, and now I'm not even, exhibiting. I was still making art, and I still make art in the background, But Roberta Smith came to talk to students at the University of Guelph, and she was addressing, I think, a graduating class, and it was like a packed house. And she basically said to everyone, "You're not all going to be famous artists." And there was like a pin drop in the lecture. And she then said, "But you all can stay close to the art. You can work in a gallery. You can be a journalist. You can be a professor. You can, she named like." You can be a designer, like a whole host of things that kept you close to the art. And really, that was the one time, like, I think it was in 2005, where I actually was like, it almost gave me permission to say, it's okay. Like, you are doing this job, and, you may not be a famous artist. My friends made far better art. My friends make far better art than I do. So like, I'm pretty good about like not doing that. But and as for the commercial gallery, I had a good friend who I kind of grew up with in the artist run centers. She could sell art far better than I could. I cannot do that to save my life. If you want me to write a grant, no problem. But that separated me.
Well, there's so many places, so many roles we can fill in service of art in the art world. So that's great. I love hearing about how that panned out for you. So thank you so much, Christy. Stefan, same question to you. What was that? What did that look like for you, leaving NSCAD?
I remember my first foundation class in the Lismer building with Arthur Handy, Mickey Handy, and it totally blew my mind. Like I didn't really go to art when I was in Calgary, and I just like threw myself into the deep end, so to speak. And Arthur said, if you want to do anything in the art world, you have to immerse yourself in it. You have to like live and breathe it. You got to put yourself out, go to all the openings, see as much as you can, like just make it part of your life. And it was just kind of like, okay, I'll do that. And started going to openings, went to, the first show I went and saw in Halifax was the Denise Tanasso show at the Mount St. Vincent University Art Gallery. And I got immediately involved in like student union and on clubs, and just started going to as much as I could and kind of living and breathing art. And it just started happening. Like you just start, you get involved because everybody needs help, especially when you're young in the arts. You just kind of help everybody out. And from there, I think it was probably year 3, year 4, I kind of started figuring out like what a curator is. And my art really shifted away from like art making into more like organizing and like curatorial type of practice. And then I ended up getting a job at Mount St. Vincent University Art Gallery as like a technician, and had an amazing mentor named Ingrid Jenkner, who was actually Mickey's wife at the time when I was a student. And so it's all this kind of serendipity of the world kind of connecting. And, from there, you're in the museum kind of art gallery system. So you start going to conferences, you start, going to fairs. I went and did grad school at OCAD. I met Christy at the power plant. My wife worked there for many years as well. They had some overlap, and it's just these connections last a lifetime. And I love that you can always just come back. And I haven't seen Christy in a year or 2 at least, and it was just like, oh hey, like right back at it. And I think once you get embedded into that community, it just you start finding those opportunities and you work towards them. And my big thing was like after grad school, it was Nova Scotia connections again. Sarah Fillmore, who was at the AGNS at the time and is now the CEO director, hired me to run the Sobey Award, and I stayed in Toronto and did that. And I concurrently worked a job at the Hamilton Artist Inc. as a director. So I was doing 2 things and working on the train as I commuted into Hamilton from Toronto, and just kind of make it work. But I was immersed, and that's kind of what I've always kept close, is just like live, breathe it, do as much as it that you can. And once it becomes part of your life, it becomes a little bit easier. It's just life.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say, Stefan, you were one of the kind of bright lights in Toronto. You still are, of course, but there's lots of people who, not many people were. I was born in Toronto, but like a lot of Toronto's makeup is like people from elsewhere, which why I love that city. But Stefan was one of those people who was like super friendly, had the right attitude, and I think we've all kind of been through like such a tough time with the pandemic and everything. It's like you just kind of want to hang out with people and make things work for people who have the right attitude and kind of, we all work in the arts because there's a passion. We all are not choosing to do other things because we love this so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that so much of the role of somebody at a like managerial role or curatorial role or director role, that love of the arts really comes into play because you're making so much happen. You're making so much happen for the artists and for the viewers. So yeah, exactly. I think you nailed it. I'd love to ask you both to tell us a bit about your current work now. Excuse me. What are some of the responsibilities at the institution that you work at? What does your team look like? Maybe Christy, I'm looking at you right now. So could you tell us a little bit about your role at MoMA?
Sure. So I'm the senior deputy director and I oversee exhibitions and collections. I have 5 main departments reporting to me. I have exhibition planning and administration, registration and collection, registration and collection management. I have collection and exhibition information. I have imaging and visual resources, and I have exhibition design and planning. So those are the 5. It's probably around 100 staff, and it's everyone from our shop. So in exhibition design and planning, we have both 3D designers and then we have shops. So everything from like electricians, carpentry, framing, painters, and we have designers, but we run the budget of MoMA. We are really the people behind the scenes. So we plan everything. We ship everything in, we manage our collection. MoMA has over 200,000 works of art in the collection, and we are certainly have a voracious appetite. I have likened us to the hoarders. I often, when we walk through storage, I was like, we have to deal with this. We talk about, we have people in our CEI department that really like manages the database of all the artwork. So we can see where things move. It's it's like a very standard museum database, but we can pull stats. So if someone says like, who are all the Ukrainian artists we have on view right now, or how many Ukrainian artists do we have in our collection? We kind of pull that from the database. We image everything. We probably image around 5,000 images a year of both recent acquisitions, installations, etc. Exhibition planning and administration is everything from artist contracts, artist fees, the planning of an exhibition from curatorial insight to the final delivery. We also place insurance. So for instance, our Ed Ruscha show that we have on right now and our Picasso, the values of those works coming into MoMA far exceed our regular insurance. So we have to apply for US federal indemnity that helps us cover those works. This is very administrative, but like nobody wants to spend money on insurance if you don't have to. So, and we do, and that's the same thing in Canada. There's a program that does the same thing through the Canadian government. And registration and collection management, these are all the registrars that figure out our incoming and outgoing loans, our loans from other institutions, the management of our collection, the storage of the collection, and then all the art handling staff who take such good care of moving things around. So we have that. And then my kind of largest responsibility, and something I talk about all the time, and I just had a meeting prior to this, is like the exhibition schedule. So MoMA puts on around 52 exhibitions a year, and that's kind of divided down the middle of both collection exhibitions and temporary exhibitions that come in. And so we are constantly moving art, whether it's loaned in or our collection, and we're really looking at like what is the mix of per season of exhibitions. So we want to make sure that whoever comes to MoMA, they have a great experience, whether they hate the work or they love it. We want to make sure that our mission of thinking about, we are committed to both, early modern, and contemporary art, that we have a mix of that, but from a variety of media, variety of artists, variety of geographic locations. And so we're constantly like looking at this Jenga board of like, what do we need to put where? And we turn 100 in 2029. So we were just having a conversation of like, what does 2029 look like? And so we're often planning very far in advance because it takes a while. And our Picasso and Fontainebleau exhibition that just recently opened, we were kind of going back, and it took 4 years to plan, like from like, okay, we're going to do this show all the way up to the delivery of this fall. So that's kind of what we do. But I like it because in the sense that I like planning. I'm a total nerd, but I also understand how to make art. So when curators are talking to me about things that living artists need, I'm very sympathetic. And I think my training in Canada has been so valuable in the sense that an initiative that I've taken on is that the US is not great about paying artist fees. It's a bit inconsistent. And Canada, there are really good rules about living artists getting a certain rate. We know that CARFAC exists for a reason, but a lot of institutions are funded by the government, whether it's provincial, municipal, or federal. And a conversation I had with Glenn here recently was like, we need to deal with these artist fees here at MoMA. Like, they're really inconsistent. And so we have a new schedule, and we're making sure that as a living artist, we are supporting and celebrating those projects and making sure that we are paying an appropriate living wage. So I'm really proud that people can hear me as a Canadian coming in, but I'm really proud that like my artist background can say like, actually, this is really urgent and it's not up for discussion. We should just do it. And people here have, signed on completely. And I will say MoMA does pay artist fees. They have, but I just think we need to think about like that kind of scaling that we always looked at in Canada of scaling up on an annual basis is really important. Sorry to go on too long.
No, that's great. I mean, that's such like valuable experience and expertise to bring to an institution like MoMA. Do you have a favorite part of your job, Christy? Is there something in particular that like is your passion project at MoMA?
What we're looking at right now is like leveraging new technologies. And so we recently put on a exhibition of Rafiq, a Turkish artist called Rafiq Anadol. And it came out of a conversation of looking at the metadata of our collection on this platform called GitHub. Randy probably knows this more than I do. But basically this artist like pulled all the metadata and fed it, did machine learning. And we were working with him, like not me, but like other people at MoMA were like, oh, that's great. Let's do an NFT, blah, 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 blah. What we did realize is that what Rafiq kind of made and what the machine dreamed of was pretty extraordinary. And when we saw that, two of us were like, we should put that on in our lobby. Like, this is crazy. And so we talked to Rafiq and we said, like, what if we like presented this on a huge screen in MoMA's lobby? And he's like, that would be great. And basically what it is an AI that basically like looks through this data and it dreams our collection and kind of makes artwork that is constantly going on the screen. And all of us in museums and as artists, we think about, a video presentation is like, there is a form of recording. And this is live, which is a little bit different. And so that was a really exciting moment, that we could think about, what's new, like what's on the forefront of artists making new work. And that was something exciting. But what I really appreciated is us being able to be nimble, because MoMA is a steamship and there are ways where people are trenched in, like, this is how we do the work. And I think we have to be very conscious of saying like, well, is it really, or can we do that better? Or can we do it faster? And so I'm really thrilled about like thinking about new technologies, and we're looking at how we are working more efficiently with our processes here at MoMA. And the other thing is sustainability. We are very committed to reducing our carbon emissions, but also our waste. And so exhibition design and production has actually reduced the gyprock that we use of walls. We've reduced it by 76%. We used to have like, they would measure our garbage going out. And we have an evergreen system with modular walls that exhibition design and production has been working on for many years. And since I joined them, I learned what they were doing, which was extraordinary. And we're constantly thinking about like, how can we reuse and do things a lot differently at the museum so that we are not impacting waste, and that we're changing of our systems so that we have very low impact on the earth. So those are two things that are, I mean, of course, I'm excited about the shows, but I kind of like these things where I feel like creative thinkers can make things happen in a different way.
I love that. And I think that's things that we're often scared to address in the art world is things like waste and things like AI on different scales. But those are such interesting methods of tackling those issues. So thank you, Christy. Stefan, I want to turn this back to you also, and I want to hear about your role as curator at at RBC. What are some of your responsibilities? What do you do in your job? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of the fun kind of nerdy things that overlap with Christy's work as well. RBC, the art collection is also turning 100 in 2029. It began in 1929. It's now comprised of over 6,000 pieces, and in a kind of opposite of a museum collection, like 98% of the collection is on walls and lived with every day. So there isn't like a big vault of things kind of being held or anything. It's usually, a small spot that is in transit before it goes out for exhibition loan or recently acquired and is going up for another project. So it's a very lived with collection. It's also very different from a museum because we're in a space that is first, it's not as a controlled of an environment. This is an office space, so people are, this is what happens in an office. It's also a non-art audience. So like even just, walking through the doors of MoMA, you're going in to see art. And when you walk through the doors of an RBC branch or your client or an employee, that's not the top of your list. So how do you engage an audience with a non-art audience with art? So that's a really big part of what my job is. There is, of course, a lot of like real estate, a lot of architectural drawings. There's a lot of care and maintenance, asset management, insurance updates. We are constantly auditing, making sure that things are where they should be and cared for. There's also the side of, just being present in the community. So we do a lot of like just engagement with local galleries and institutions, but we're, so we're on the ground, and then that makes us subject matter experts internally. So if there's like a question about art that comes from, some banking group that wants to put a artist, decal on their window, it's like, okay, well, these are the Carfax fees. These are the things associated with executing it. I work really hard to make sure that artists are paid for the work they do and represented in the correct way. And there's some really great moments. We had an artist do a Pride t-shirt for RBC 2 years ago, and it's been the main shirt for the last 2 years, and it's like 8,000 t-shirts and people wearing it across the country, like kind of amazing thing. And the artist, got a great fee for it, and it's everybody kind of wins. It's this really wonderful moment. So my day-to-day is always different. We are a global collection, so we're in time zones 24/7 basically, and we take on anywhere from 30 to 50 projects a year. We're doing 300-400 art movements a year. We're a pretty small team. There's 3 full-time staff here in Toronto that take care of everything globally, and we have a 1 part-time person based in Minneapolis taking care of a very specific collection there and a renovation, and kind of happened over the pandemic, so we needed a expert on the ground. And then the thing that I would say I'm most excited about on a daily basis is that kind of initial interaction of a non-art audience. How do you get people excited about art? And a lot of times an immediate like, oh, why are we collecting art? Like, what is art? Like, why does it just need to be in an RBC space? I convince people of art and the merits of it on a daily basis, and that's my favorite part of the job, is just turning people onto it. We opened a public community, it's called a community gallery, a public gallery space at our main branch in downtown Toronto. It's Bay and Front Street. Union Station like exits into the base of the building. There's a couple 100,000 people walking through a day, and we have a gallery of contemporary work that we present. And it's not what you would expect, I think, necessarily from a bank, but it makes people excited. Like, they come in and they're like, oh, this is really cool. Like, tell me about this artwork. People were viewing them and living with them every day, but the artists themselves. And the focus is very much a contemporary Canadian art. We love to pay artists that are living for the work that they do. And we have an even deeper focus on emerging artists, because we know how important that is early stages of the career. So a lot of the times we're some of the first major institution to collect an artist. And that really, you can start seeing that trajectory as they move into other major exhibition spaces, hopefully the MoMA eventually, but I'm sure there's some moments we can track back.
Well, I love that both of you have spoken so well about the importance of paying artists. It's so nice to hear that such big institutions are doing that. That's very exciting. Stefan, can you talk a bit about why a corporate collection gets developed, and what kind of, maybe talk a bit about some of the projects that you're working on, like that are outside of just the displays within the banks and the offices, if you could.
Yeah. So the collection started actually in Halifax. There was a lot of sailboats, a lot of coastal lines, and it was really started by executives, people at the bank who had an interest in art. And it wasn't until the 70s that they got a curator, and that's when you really started seeing like the focus, because for the most part, the first few decades of the collection, it was just those who had that interest like deeply that were also bankers. And so there's some real gems there. But once you have a collection and it's mounting, and you're RBC, you're the most recognizable brand in Canada, you're the largest financial institution in the country, you're one of the biggest ones globally. There's a lot of responsibilities for supporting those communities, and that is really core to what RBC does. And it's not something I ever thought of when I was in art school, like, oh, like a bank, that could be where I could work. But these commitments from RBC to help artists in many, many, many different genres, to learn, to grow, to just be able to be an artist today is a really important one. And that's why I always argue for the payment of it. But it's also a reason for having a collection to show where we are now. And collecting contemporary is a moment of time, and it becomes that record. And a bank is something that has a long trajectory as an institution. And so how do you reflect the clients and the community and what's going on culturally with the collection? And that's really where we're getting, and we get to have these sometimes even difficult conversations with people because of the artwork. It really can help drive forward other aspects of the bank. It drives creativity. It makes people feel maybe more welcome. And yeah, those are the things that I think are important for RBC to collect. And as it grows, we'll see how it changes, but it really is that record. And I love looking back and bringing those kind of like historical moments together. And I know Christy probably has a lot of the same kind of aspects of looking into databases, because we spend a lot of time. It's not all just that glamour out. We're kind of in the trenches a bit, going through old records, things like that, because they didn't have digital records. It's 20s. So yeah.
Yeah, and as you're, it's interesting that you're both working for these institutions that are approaching their centenary. And Christy, I want to talk a bit about looking back, about MoMA. and about like what is changing for MoMA in the next few years. What about their curatorial intentions or priorities have changed, and what it means to be looking at modern art in this moment. So can you tell us a little bit about what MoMA is thinking as it comes up to its 100-year anniversary?
Yeah, sure. I think I've been here for 2 years, and so I have been like a sponge, like soaking everything in. But the one thing that is really important for MoMA, and the curators will say, is that there's no one way to tell the history of modern and contemporary art. And so, our collection started in 1929. It started with a bit of a gamble. It was well resourced, but it really they focused on film and architecture and these other curatorial kind of media that like nobody was really interested in. And so these kind of group of women who started MoMA, which is pretty exciting to think about, is that they took a gamble of what wasn't in New York. And as we kind of cast ahead, the collection grew not only in numbers to over 200,000 works, but it also grew in geography and media. And if you look at the makeup of who makes up MoMA's collection, while it's not perfect, it has grown. And I think that, the curators are less interested in saying like, here is the canon of modern painting. Like that is like, it's tone deaf, it's inaccurate, it's not even interesting to talk about that. And we all look at our art history texts, no matter when you went to school, you can see variations of biases. So I think there's a lot of research and scholarship here at MoMA. There are probably around, I would say, like 40 to 50 curators. And so we very rarely take shows in. Like we create things because there's enough kind of bench strength thinking about things. And this is from like chief curators down to like, associate and assistant curators. But I think the story that they're trying to tell, and this became very apparent in the 2019 expansion, was let's tell stories of our collection. Let's use our collection to tell very interesting stories in our chronology. So we kind of think about 3 chronologies, like early modern from like 1880s to 1940s, mid-century 1940s to 1970, and then contemporary from 1970 on. This will cause problems going as we go further into time, because 1970 will start seeming old, as it maybe feels already. But to think about like, are there different media that can tell a story at that time period? And so, in the expansion, in total, MoMA has around 175,000 square feet of exhibition space to plan. And probably we'd say around 90,000 to 100,000 of that is dedicated to our collection. That was the whole thrust of the expansion in 2019. Now, when you close a museum and you kind of slow things down before you start a capital project, you have tons of time to plan for these collection galleries, and they were spectacular, absolutely spectacular. They merged medias, artists, thinking about global locations. Like there are far more interesting stories about the history of art and of contemporary art that's being made now. The problem we face right now is that we no longer have that planning period. So we're just like constantly moving art and turning things over. And so the question that comes up is like, what's urgent? Like we want to think about when curators put proposals forward for collection galleries, what is that, what's that story that's needed to be told? Where are we missing representation globally? So a lot of it we're interested in is like Brazil, Afro-Brazil. Anyone who went to the Sao Paulo Biennale, I didn't have the pleasure of doing that, but like people have come back saying like there is such important work being produced. And if we think about the history of modern contemporary art, like we should be a museum that is actually looking at who are we missing from what geographies, because traditionally it was very North American and European. And there's a lot of problems to unpack with that. There's a history, but I think you have to have your eyes wide open. And I think as we approach 2029, I think we want to be known as a museum that takes some risks, and we should have a degree of uncomfort, right? Like we're working with the most subjective mediums in the world. And, artists help us understand the world that we live in. And I think we need to be flexible to have like a host of voices that are being presented in the galleries. And so the conversation that we have is like, what is 2029? How do we walk back from that? What are we putting in the schedule that actually builds up to 29 at the same time? And so it's really it's a conversation about collection work and temporary exhibitions. And traditionally, museums have always relied on the glamour of a Tempex, but it's staggering to know that at any one time, we only have 1% of our collection on display. Like we only have 2,000 collection works on display, which is, the question is that what are we not showing? What are we going to mine that collection? Because we have an embarrassment of riches that we want to kind of go through. And curators are really interested in that. And, we will continue to acquire, but I think there's a different thinking about how do it's not just about like hoarding. Can we like share collections with people? How do we celebrate these artists? And one program that we're participating in is with an institution called Art Bridges. And the remit of Art Bridges, which is a subset of Crystal Bridges, is basically museums will loan sections of the collection to Art Bridges, and Art Bridges will actually pay to get it on the road for smaller museums across the US. And so MoMA's given 3 tranches. LACMA, I think Chicago, and a number of other institutions have kind of like said, these collections can be farmed out to whoever you want. And Art Bridges will ship it, will install it, will support these smaller museums to actually have some collection works on display for a year. And then it will tour to another organization. And I'm totally supportive of that. I think it's a great idea. I think it thinks about being generous with collections and making sure that we can share these amazing pieces of work with even more people. And that outreach I think is something is really key, and a responsibility of a large institution that we should be doing that. But yeah, 2029, it's hard to unpack, but say it again, Stefan.
It's like ETS coming back in America. That's great. Like we used to have that in Canada, and it really helped. But that's really exciting. I didn't know about that program, Christy.
Well, it's all credit of Art Bridges, and part of it is us really saying we need to be really nimble, and let's not like make it onerous. Like it's got to have all these conservation checks. Like conservation is important, but like let's send some robust works. And let's make sure they get out in the world, and let's not worry about things as much. Like my saying this month is perfection is the enemy of the good. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, just a second what Stefan said. That's such an interesting strategy for coping with such a large collection, especially while trying to collect more contemporary work. And like, what do you do with this like vast, rich collection, if not share it? That's really exciting to hear. Christy, you mentioned that you were making art, or I can't remember if you said you are still, but I'd like to bring that back. Have you maintained an artistic practice in your role? Is it difficult to find the time or space to make work? Or what has your relationship to making art change? How has it changed in doing this work?
I think that I will say with much regret, I have not made a lick of art since I got to New York, but I also have a 4-year-old. So my conversations with him are very artistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in Toronto, when I had my studio in my house, I could like make stuff and leave it out. Living in New York, you got small places and you kind of need to have, so we are looking towards a space that I could leave something out, and if I don't touch it, but I can always go back. And part of it is like, Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. But my newest art project is my 4-year-old, and it's great talking to him about art and kind introducing him to the city. And if we go to the Met, I always promise him a hot dog from a cart as we leave the steps, as long as he'll go see a show. I took him to this beautiful small Louise Bourgeois painting show. I think it was last year. And he walked in and he's like, well, I don't like this. I thought it was great. I thought it was great. But you know, I feel like I'm like discovering art through his eyes, which I'm really grateful for. And I think that's the best thing I can kind of do for him. But I think the practice is, you know, I think when you make artwork, you kind of always feel a little bit more sane after doing that. And I know that if I can at least do a small drawing, I sleep better. I feel kind of more focused. But I look forward to the next time I can actually spend some time doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great question, Mollie.
Yeah, no worries. I feel your pain. I'm in grad school and trying to figure out time to make art is tricky. So I understand.
I want to know what Stefan's doing. Like, what
Me
you
too.
tell me, how are you balancing it?
I found like I feel like my curatorial life is so much, brings me so much creative like power in a way. Like I'm constantly getting to talk about new ideas, talk with artists, you know, see art, but also present it in unique ways because we have all of the space to work with. So I feel like that's like the creative outpouring for me. And like it happened pretty quickly. Like I always loved making art, but I loved making art happen more is maybe the way I like to talk about it. And I feel like and that's totally okay. I take a lot of joy in making art happen and seeing it flourish. That I haven't really felt the urge to get back. I always loved, you know, I had like a friend couple that they had young boys, and one of them was really into art and was having trouble in school, and they didn't have a good art program at the school. So I just, you know, did a couple like after school lessons with their son, and it was so much fun to just like go back and like, oh, like what was like something really instrumental that like changed my perspective when I first went to art school. And like it was as simple as like negative space, like positive and negative space, like how do you drawing a circle, and just these like moments of like I like really like drawing a really good circle, and sometimes I'll just see if I still have that motion. But you know, those training, it's again, it comes back to this aspect that Christy talked about. Like we went to art school, we know how things are produced, and getting to speak with an artist on, you know, the long-term care of that work and or the presentation of the work or how you're contextualizing it, and you have that knowledge and ability to really dive deep into their process, that's so rewarding as well. And so I never take for granted any of this, like the classes I took at NSCAD, or even like, I'm so happy I did architecture in high school because like I can read, I look at floor plans constantly, architectural plans constantly, and all of these aspects that I kind of gathered over my career are things that I use almost on a daily basis at my job or in my life. So yeah, take advantage, just remember those moments, I would say, if you're struggling with it now. Yeah.
I think that's so eloquently said about like the joy of making art happen. I feel the same way. I felt that also like when I was still making art, but at the power plant, we always had these like crazy projects where like, can you ship in this Ferris wheel that has cars that are loaded onto it from the Netherlands, Christy? And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And I was like, yeah, sure, we can figure that out. And, you know, working with John Cormeling, like he brought like carnival guys with him, and we figured out that, you know, in North America, which is more litigious, like you cannot, and there's different sizes of cars, we're going to have to get a car sponsorship in order to run this Ferris wheel because they all have to weigh the same weight. You can't put a Mini on and like a Suburban because like the balance won't work. But I mean, it was crazy, but like I look back at it and I'm absolutely thrilled. There was one guy who worked with him from the Netherlands. His name was Rob. He was covered in tattoos, and on the side of the head, it said in Gothic lettering, "Life is pain." And Rob loved talking to me, and he would often show up at the front desk of the power plant and say in a very thick Dutch accent, "Is Christy here?" And everyone would be like, "Oh no, he cannot go up there." I'm like, if it's Rob, it's fine, send him up. But I mean, like, these are making art happen is like you have these like wild experiences in your life. I was also going to say, Today, we have an opening for this master printmaker called Jacob Samuel, and he has printed many, many artists' works, and he is just amazing. And we're opening his exhibition here at MoMA today. And I went down to say hello to Jacob and his wife this morning. And it was just like, it was so nice. It reminded, I actually talked about NSCAD, and I said, I remember going up to printmaking at NSCAD and meeting Ed Porter, who was like amazing, amazing guy, salt of the earth. And I said, I remember the acid baths at NSCAD, and it was like in a room that had like wooden slatted floors and everything. And Randy will attest to this, but like there was like acid all over the place. And there are these like really dead, feathers that people would get the bubbles off their intaglio plates. And so Jacob and I were talking about that. And when I mentioned NSCAD, he's like, oh, yeah. And I was like, there you go. So that was just a little shout out to some printmakers and a show that we're opening tonight here.
Yeah, and thinking, I mean, that's so great to think about, like the work of a master printmaker as a person who makes art happen too, is
Absolutely.
that role. So, but yeah, you really need a certain kind of magic touch in this job, I imagine, to make something like a Ferris wheel full of cars happen, and to think, oh, I'll get a sponsorship. Like, that's no big deal. You really have to have a kind of, like a magic touch to make such big and exciting things happen, I think.
I think that's the creative brain. I think that's what we're kind of all programmed with. I think it's like an emotional intelligence to like convince people to like join you, like join me on this crazy voyage. I'll make sure it's going to be fun. But, we also talk about like, we have lots of tough conversations. Like I have 6 chief curators who have very strong opinions, and I work for my director who, like, that's, he's the final decision maker. But a lot of it is like this negotiation of like, hey, here are some ideas. And part of it is like, how do you propose a problem? And my thing with my staff is like, listen, I'm here to back you up, but please, if you have a problem, you got to bring a solution. I'm not here to explain it. And I'm really not interested in like doing other people's jobs, in the sense that like, the more you give away, the richer you are. You don't want to micromanage staff. You want staff to like find solutions and to know that you're there. If the proverbial shit hits the fan, we can figure it out. But I think what's interesting is like, no day is the same. It's varied. And I mean, Stefan is installing Art Toronto right now. So like, there's a lot of negotiation that's happening in real time for him. And I think it keeps you young, and it keeps you kind of like, on your toes. Can be a little tiring after a while, but it keeps you definitely on your toes.
Definitely keeps you going. I love that. Like, that's brightness. And like, you're right, solutions, problems, these are the things that are always going to happen in the art world. And I worked really closely with an artist named Mike Alexier, and he had the saying that problems are good, because it just means you need to find a solution for them. And solutions are where art happens. These are the things like, oh, I can't get the cars. How do I get the cars? You find a way. And I feel like that's when the magic is it's like you can have all the right people, but you just need what's the hurdle you're getting over. And that's when things get really exciting. So
yeah, when everything is too smooth, I become incredibly suspicious. And I felt that way in my art making. I was like, this was very effortless. This must be a really bad idea. You need to have some angst in your practice.
I like this way of thinking about it as like that it's the creative brain that's allowing for these making of possibilities and thinking so big. Can you guys talk a bit about what it's like to, I mean, you've touched on this, Christy, in your statement about the richer you are because the more you give away. Can you both talk a bit about what it's like to work on your teams and how you all try and think creatively together, if you work in any kind of managerial role on your team, or etc. But yeah, thinking creatively in your teams, in your job.
Stefan, you go. I talk too much.
Well, it's like I'm in a small team. Like I have 2 colleagues, Corey Jackson and Jane Hutchison, and we are always connecting on kind of all aspects of it, of the position. We have specific roles that we focus on and do, but like RBC is like 80, 90,000 employees. So there's this whole breadth of a group that we reach out to. So there's like, we reported to the brand team, which you're like, where do you put the art people? It kind of makes the most sense because it's about, it's about RBC's commitment to the arts and how do you share that with the people? You do it through branding. And then there's the corporate citizenship side, there's the real estate side, there's all the executives, there's all the wealth management things, all the sponsorships. So there's all these amazing experts in all of their fields. And it's kind of totally like a universal constellation that you kind of reach into. And, it's like been working with a team on digital merchandising, and there's this, giant jumbotron in our main branch in Toronto that exits out of Union Station. And it's like 2 donut screens, like enormous. And we've had art put on to it, and it was kind of an early ask. And it's the artists who like totally transformed how the screen can be used and how smooth it can be done, and like totally blew the minds of the digital merchandising team. And so they've come back and they're like, okay, let's get more art. Like, how do we push the limits of it? And then I've gotten to learn so much about like just, spot placement and like timing and like animation, like little bits within the branding side. And like everything's interconnected, and artists are always interrogating what occurs in the world. And so it's just really like an interesting scope in. As far as like the management of our team, like, yeah, we're small, we're mighty, and we can do a lot, but we're nothing without the help of colleagues kind of across like dozens and dozens of departments.
Yeah, and like you said that in some of these projects, the artists themselves that you're working with get to be collaborators in that way.
Yeah, here's a problem. How do you make it work? And like artists are like, oh, sweet, and they have a video spot that comes on every 4 minutes at one of the highest traffic areas in the country. So like it's very cool, but it takes work, and it takes, I have to manage the internal side of like, why are we putting art on the screen? Like, it should be for branding, it should be about selling something, but it's like, I'm coming at it like, oh, if we put art up, it's going to make people want to look at the screen more and engage with it more and trust it more and like feel this like connection to a space more. And like all of a sudden that kind of switches internally how we approach, a brand side of things. And that's very cool that like art can have that ability to shift the perspective, but that's the favorite part of my job, is changing people's perspective. So yeah, Christy, what about your team? I'm excited to know how many.
Yeah, it's a big team.
Yeah, it's a big team. I mean, everything I learned from, like, as you said, like boxing above my weight. Like the power plant, we were a very tiny team. Redhead, we were a very tiny team. YYZ. So all of that was foundational to what I have here. And like, we have 100 people that like I'm responsible for. And then there's the intersection with like all the other parts across MoMA. But, the one thing I learned the most is when I, was Matthew's chief of staff at the AGO, is that, I sat in the director's office. Like I could be, I could just be like really authoritarian and say like, you need to do this because the director says to do this. But part of it is like the trade-off, like you think about influence and authority. And it's like, you want to have influence. You don't want to be like, you need to do this because I say it. Because like, nobody likes working with people like that. That's like completely lame. And that's a technical term. But part of it is like, what's your influence? If you have good influence and you're working with people, like things, you have a different way of making things happen. And so for me, I have 5 direct reports. We meet, I meet with them individually every week for half an hour. They're very fast meetings. I have all of them together every 2 weeks. And I was like, this is the meeting where if you have a problem, we need to talk about it here. And I don't like wasting time. So I'm like, if you have nothing to report, that's great. Let's not talk. Let's we all got enough, time is important. And we talk about sustainability and efficiency. And then the one thing I noticed when I got to MoMA is that our whole team of 100 people, like never, ever met together. And so I have these 3 times a year. It's the exhibitions and collections, all staff. And I kick it off. I like very quick, like, here's the schedule for the next year. Here are some high level updates, but basically I give it away to all of the divisions to say, you need to have somebody who's going to report and share what they're doing. So the last time we had carpentry talk about things that they were making, they talked about everything from Rob Gober's show a number of years ago to what they used a grain silo to do this Stan Vanderbeek video presentation. And they showed a stop animation of how they constructed it together with a grain silo. And then they lined it with fur and then painted it and then projected on it. We have people talking about like contract management, all different things. But part of it is to say, like, we are here as a team and like we all work with each other all the time on the floor. And I want we want to celebrate each other. And we introduce all new staff on this team of 100 and just really make sure that, we share. It's a very funny meeting. People have a good sense of humor and that's it. And part of it was just like, how do you manage is like, it's through influence, and you want to kind of bring people along to, have the same values and vision that you want to share, to say like, this is what we're here for. And sure, there's like times where people will come in, they'll be saying, this curator or this artist is so difficult. And I always kind of remind people that like MoMA is not going to find the cure for cancer. And so let's keep everything into perspective. And like, if we want to see a real emergency, we can walk out the door, but like, we're here for a reason and there's always a solution. And, I want to make sure I'm here. I really hate working from home. So I try to be here also from a learning perspective. But a lot of it is like being on the floor, greeting staff, making sure people feel like they're seen and they're heard, and that we're solutions oriented and we're not going to wallow in like the same thing, because, you hear it everywhere. But all of it to say is I learned a lot. And I think what Stefan's saying is like, it doesn't really matter how big the institution is like, it's how you work with people. And it's those relationships that kind of get you to the end goal.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got to wrap it up, but I want to ask just before we go, we've talked a little bit about some upcoming projects, but can you guys tell us about anything that we should keep our eyes peeled for from RBC and MoMA? Anything coming up in the next little while?
Go for it, Stefan.
Art Toronto.
Art Toronto. This weekend. Or next weekend.
Yeah.
This weekend or next weekend?
This weekend.
A day and a half. Yeah. So yeah, that's where I'm at, and I'll be there all weekend. Say hi if you're in town. Yeah.
Thanks, Evan. Christy?
I would say we have a Joan Jonas exhibition opening next spring, and the reason why I bring it up is Joan has a summer home in Cape Breton.
She does, yeah.
And she's taking over the whole 6th floor, which is around 16,000 square feet of like video installation, like amazing work. We also have her performing in both our studio space and in our atrium, and a lot of it is shot in Cape Breton. So I thought for those on this call, that would be significant. But anytime you're in New York, please say hello. I'm always happy to see fellow Canadians or NSCAD people.
Thanks, Christy. Well, thanks everyone so much for joining us today. And thank you, Christy and Stefan, for joining us for such a thoughtful and informative chat.
My pleasure. It's so good to see everyone. Hi, Sarah Hartland-Rowe.
Thank you. Oh, hi.
One of the best drawers in the world, Sarah. Amazing. Bye, Randy. It was good to see you. And Mollie and Trina, thank you so much for your support for this talk. We really appreciate it.